Hey everyone, so I am doing a Nintendo Retrospective for their 125th anniversary. I am playing my top 25 games leading up to my very first list video, my top 25 Nintendo games. It doesn't need to be Nintendo developed, but it does need to be Nintendo published, like in the case of this game. We are on episode 5 of 26 episodes now, alright? This one, as you can see, is not Nintendo per se. This is definitely a Square Enix developed title, but they published Final Fantasy V Advanced. Actually, they published all of the advanced games. Nintendo paid for that. I definitely remember playing Final Fantasy V. What was it? It wasn't out in America, I don't believe. So when I played it, I played it on an emulator. I played it on SNES back in like 2001. I ran through several of the Final Fantasies, and that's when I didn't know about the renaming. I played 2, and I'm like, oh, this is great, right? But the renaming, the whole naming conventions and stuff like that. Then I definitely did play through most of the Final Fantasy games, including Mystical Quest. And that was the time where I was just playing through random Super Nintendo games, and it was fun. This one, I do remember this one vividly. And I just remember having so much fun with it, even if it wasn't on this, on the actual console. I was a kid. First of all, I didn't really know any better, and I just wanted to play games. I didn't at that time. In this timeline, I'm not really going through the story. That's not what this is. This playthrough is for. This is the advanced version over the Super Nintendo version, however, so this was the first one to technically be localized, officially be localized. So if you've not played it, you can pause it and read it, but I'm not going to go through it right now. That's not what this series is for, per se. We will be talking about the story a little bit, but that's not what this whole series is for. But yeah, I played it. I just wanted to play games. I didn't really know any better when I was a kid, and I was unfamiliar with the Final Fantasy games on Super Nintendo up to that point. I had certainly played Final Fantasy VII, not knowing really what I was doing, not until a little bit later. The wind just stopped. But this was so back to what I was saying. This is about the time. If you're stringing together my timeline of video games, I've got the first 4 episodes, and I kind of placed them with years, not really. With some of them, you can kind of tell where they are in my life. This one was in 2001, so this was before I was still in middle school. And my parents are divorced at this point. Definitely divorced by several years at this point. This is when me and my dad lived in our second place. The first one was being next to a car wash of all places, and it was a 1-bedroom. That's where I played a lot of my N64 and my PS1. Well, I guess both places, really. But the second place, that's when the next generation started to come out. Xbox and GameCube, and we got a GameCube on release, if I remember. So that kind of puts things into perspective at this point. Now, I didn't play Advanced, obviously, in 2001. This game didn't come out until 2005 or 2006. But I definitely played 5 on the Super Nintendo. But the reason why I'm picking the Game Boy Advanced is I'm trying to pick... Stuff's going down. I'm trying to pick some of the ports because I want to show off that they exist elsewhere. I'm sure Final Fantasy V Advance is probably cheaper than a Final Fantasy V Japanese imported cart. Tycoon Meteor. Right? Oh, I remember this game. Bako, wait here, okay? Now, the art did change from the Super Nintendo to the GBA version, so things are a tad different from what I remember. But that's okay, right? It's not about it being the same. It's per se, like, all the art. It's just about having fun. The fun that I had with this game in particular. Ooh. All this music. Ooh. Attack! And the battles, if I remember correctly, are a little bit more fleshed out in this version. The GBA is on par and a little bit more powerful than the Super Nintendo, but obviously it's a way smaller screen, so there's a couple of drawbacks in there. Hey, are you alright? Yes, I believe so. Now make love to me right here, next to the meteorites. No. So yeah, that kind of puts it in my timeline of so far. Please enter a name. Nah, it's gonna be Bart's. I should rename him to Butts, but that's okay. We don't need to name him to Butts. Now, to be fair, this game I played as a kid, but I didn't play it on the console it was originally meant for. So I didn't have that, whole connection of slamming the cartridge in, flipping on the switch, not working, pulling it out, blowing into it, throwing it back in, and trying to get it to work, right? I mean, we've already established that I didn't have too much time with the Super Nintendo. At one point when I was living with my mother, however, I didn't have a console there. The only one that I had, because my parents were divorced, was a GBA. I had that. I shared it between the two households. The consoles I had, however, I was barely ever allowed to bring over. Oh, there's another man over here. But the GBA, my father was like, "That's okay. You can take that one." Oh, sorry, Kitty was doing weird things. You can take that one over to your mother's. Share it between the two. Bring it back and forth. That's totally fine. And I did, and we'll get into one or two of the games later on that I played religiously on my GBA. Fantastic system. I loved my GBA. I think the first game I ever got for it was Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, of all things. Not the greatest game, mind you, but I had fun with it. As a kid, you kind of take what you get, right? So they're we gotta go this way. Blah 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 blah. What about you? Oh, sorry, I'm gonna go on my own. Good luck though. Later, man. Take a sip of this homemade soda. Okay, not homemade, because I didn't make the syrup. I bought the syrup, and we put the bottle into the machine, and it carbonates the water. Delicious. If I remember correctly, there is a secret over here. For all I know, they may have even taken that out of the GBA version, though. Also, totally looks like there's supposed to be a door there. Spoiler alert. Right, what was I saying? I got sidetracked. Oh, there it is. Aha! Here we go. Getting in there. So this game, I beat this game. I beat most of the Final Fantasy games. I even went through and beat Earthbound, which is on this list actually. I beat Earthbound, and I beat several other games, and I had fun with them. That's all this is about. Is the games that you had fun on Nintendo platforms. More specifically, games that Nintendo developed and published. And like I said, this game, they definitely published. They didn't develop this by any means. But even if they never published it specifically on Super Nintendo, the first 6 Final Fantasy games, 7 Final Fantasy games, because Mystic Quest is definitely in this. Excuse me. I mean, you really think of Nintendo, right? When you think of Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3, you go, oh, that was totally the Nintendo. And then Final Fantasy, well, what we thought was 2, but was really 4, 5, and 6. No, that was totally the Super Nintendo. And then there was Mystic Quest, which was, again, totally the Super Nintendo, right? So later, it wasn't until, 2009, 2007, that the games started appearing elsewhere, specifically the PSP and iOS and Android. Now I have the PSP versions as well. I prefer them on the PSP only because I don't like touch controls, but I like when they take the games like this and they update them. Now, granted, I am certainly a pixel art junkie. If you guys haven't seen my pixel art builds, I love pixel art, right? But I also do like, big, beautiful, high definition art. Now, the PSP by no means is high definition, right? But they put some love into the remakes for PSP 1 and 2. They think they did 1, 2, 3, and 4. They didn't get to 5 or 6 on the PSP, though. If they had more time or given the money, I'm sure that they would have, right? Especially because it had been released on the GBA, it had already been updated. There's an English script out there. I wouldn't be surprised if Nintendo tried holding on to to Final Fantasy 5 and 6 on the GBA, right? I definitely preferred those versions, especially since 4 is Final Fantasy 4 Complete, which is Final Fantasy 4 The After Years, and then something else after the After Years, which was originally released on Japanese cell phones and then the Wii Virtual Console all together. Except for the extra. There is a little bit extra in that version. And, I prefer those, honestly. What I prefer even more was I did play Final Fantasy 3 on my 3DS. Now, that is a way different approach. It's in 3D, pseudo 3D. It's still the same style, but it's a mix of new and old, and it's actually pretty good. I liked it. Now, what I like even more than all of that is the Final Fantasy games on PC. They just recently re-released 3 on PC, which was a port of the iOS version, which was a port of the 3DS version, DS version, if you're keeping up at home. All right, in the story now we have party members. Yay! And this was the one where 5 may have actually been my first Final Fantasy that I really realized what was going on. Now, 7 technically was my first Final Fantasy, but I was like 7 or 8. I knew video games, right? I had an N64. I knew these things, but I didn't quite get RPGs at the time, right? Because RPGs, they take a little bit more than just playing Star Fox 64 or Bomberman 64. Not to say that they're, non-RPG games are lesser games by any means. They're all games and they're all fun, right? But RPGs do take a little bit more thought. And as a 7-year-old or 8-year-old, I did not have that thought, right? So 7 is definitely my first exposure to Final Fantasy games. 5, however, is the first one that I ever played through from beginning to end and beat. Now, to be fair, save states kind of tainted my experience because I did definitely use them, right? I mean, it was an emulator. You use what your emulators got, right? It had save states. I used them. I'm not ashamed to admit that. I love save states, actually. Save states are amazing. They cut out, in some cases, hours of backtracking, and it's beautiful. Oh, you're going to do 0 damage to the crab? Damn. Alright, well, I was going to say something. I totally spaced on it. So, this version over the Super Nintendo version is a little, I mean, there's a little bit more animation. There's a little bit more graphic fidelity to some of the backgrounds and some of the art, which you can't see on the main menu here. And the music, although it has it's missing an audio track. It's missing an instrument, technically. But it still sounds better or just on par. Like, it's kind of cool. They did remake 3 and 4 for the DS and pseudo 3D. I never got to play 4. 4 is not my favorite Final Fantasy game. Actually, it's probably my least favorite Final Fantasy game, only because of how overdone it is. It is it is, in my opinion, overly hyped for like no apparent reason. Also, I like this, how it looks like they're hiding. They did so many cool things with their limited tech. It was just kind of badass, showing you that the button does, there are things on the environment that you get to press. But 4, I think, is very overhyped. Now, that's not to say that I don't think that people can't have. I should have not done that. People can certainly have their opinions and their favorite Final Fantasy game. And if your Final Fantasy game happens to be 4, I mean, go for it, right? That's totally your prerogative and your thing. But that's not my favorite Final Fantasy game. 7 and 9 have to be like tied for first with Final Fantasy. I also like 12. I also like this one, 5, a lot. And 3, only because I've actually been playing that a lot. I recently got it on PC, so now I have 3, 7, and 8 on PC. I wish all of them will come to PC. That would be my dream. Even if the first 5 are ports, which they did just release 5 on Android and iOS. Even if the first 5 are ports, they're enhanced. They got better visuals and better soundtrack, and they're just overall better experiences, I think. Now, there is something to say about the originals, and I am kind of a purist in the sense that I do like to have the originals too, but I also do like to play the enhanced versions. Not only does it help, I don't have to boot up emulators, or it helps me save the cartridges and the system so that they're not being used, so that they can be preserved, because eventually those consoles are gonna break, right? But they're on the newer platforms, they're more accessible, and I am 100% an achievement whore. So the Final Fantasy games being on Steam with achievements, done, I'm there. Thank you for doing that for me. That is, however, going to be the end of this episode. If you guys liked this video, please thumbs it up or consider subscribing. I would greatly appreciate it. Remember, this is episode 5 in a series of 26 episodes leading up to my top 25 Nintendo developed and published games for their 125th birthday. Spoiler alert, Final Fantasy V is in there. Actually, spoiler alert, all of them are in there so far. I'm just trying to kill 2 birds with 1 stone by also making first look episodes, because these are, these are 25 of my most favorite games in the world. Now, once we get to like a top 5 of favorite games ever, that list vastly changes. But for the most part, these are 25 games that I love, especially because they're very nostalgic. Remember, guys, play more games, and I will see you next time. Have a good day.